of what going to the cloud means. So we're going to start with and today's seminar is really focused on the terminology and the foundations so that your team, as well as when you're working with consultants here, you're able to describe what you're looking for. So we're going to talk about the history of cloud computing. Cloud computing might go back further than you realize. What specifically is cloud computing, the pros and cons. We're going to talk about DM2 and Sage Software's computing strategy and how you can leverage cloud computing today, or what steps should you begin to take within your organization, or that you can take within your organization to deploy cloud technologies. So we'll start with the history of cloud. So I went to Wikipedia and I pulled off some definitions, but the first is that cloud computing dates back to the 1960s. John McCartney wrote about computation may someday be organized as a public utility. That's a really good way of thinking about cloud computing in the most generic sense. If you think about it like electricity or water, you're basically paying for a service that's being provided, and the infrastructure behind that service is made up of the technologies, computing centers, and those kind of things to provide it, and you are a consumer and end user of that technology. In most people's minds, it's a pay-as-you-go kind of thing, and you pay for the services you buy, and it's all hosted someplace else. That's a pretty generic and relatively narrow definition of what it all means. But almost all the modern-day characteristics of cloud computing, and these are some technical terms: elastic provisioning, provided as a utility, online, the illusion of infinite supply, is the comparison to the electric industry and the use of public, private, and government community forms, were all discussed in a 1966 book called The Challenge of the Computer Utility. Most of you guys think in terms of, or a lot of you guys go back far enough to think of things like mainframe computers, glasshouse computers with dumb terminals on the end, hooked over a dial-up network or over all kinds of serial technology, old telephone connections, that kind of thing. All those were a version of cloud computing. Specifically, if we translate what they're saying, it's the concept of delivering computing resources through a global network is rooted in the 60s. It has evolved through a number of phases over the years, which include grid and utility computing, as well as application service provisioning, or ASP, and software as a service, SaaS, which is what you're hearing nowadays. And a lot of people equate software as a service to being what the cloud is. Just to note, this is where IBM made fortunes with mainframe and supercomputer services. When I started programming computers, we worked from dumb terminals that were hooked to a mainframe computer running COBOL, if any of you guys remember that. And essentially all the processing was being done at the mainframe with our jobs. That is cloud computing. That's really, in a nutshell, what it is. The processing of that technology, the processing of that information is not happening locally on your computer, but instead is happening someplace else, and you're a client of that processing. So let's move on to talking about what is cloud computing specifically. The vision most of us have is something like this. All of our data lives up in this thing called the cloud. Our documents, our email, calendaring, our spreadsheets, all those kinds of things. And then I can access them from a smartphone, a tablet, a laptop, or a desktop, sometimes through a browser, sometimes through some other technology, but generally the definition of it is that the processing, storage, and maintenance of that application occurs somewhere else. A lot of the exposure people have when they think of the cloud, they think of something like Gmail, which is Google's mail service, or they may think of, there's a product called Dropbox, which is like a storage system for documents on the cloud so you can access them from different areas. Or Apple, of course, has a lot of stuff going on with iTunes and music in the cloud and all those kinds of things. So we all have, especially in the consumer space, a lot of experience with this term. And generally, that's what we think of when we look at it. However, the first step is to say, well, there's different types of clouds. There are hybrids, they're private, they're publics, they're premise types of cloud locations. And we're going to talk about these in a little bit more detail, but we're going to drill down to try and put some bookends on what this technology is and what it means at each level. So specifically, the cloud is defined as a provision of computational resources on demand via a computer network. Users or clients can submit a task to the service provider without actually possessing the software or hardware. The consumer's computer may contain very little software or data, serving as little more than a display terminal connected to the internet. And since the cloud is the underlying delivery mechanism, cloud-based applications and services may support any type of software application or service in use today. May support. We're going to talk a little bit about whether that's really accurate or not, but generally that's what it is. So if you translate that, it really comes down to how do you pay for your applications, services, and data? Where is it physically located, and how is it consumed by your users? So if you think about it, a lot of people equate the idea of cloud computing to being a utility, and I'm going to make that analogy in just a second. But it's not necessarily that way. There may be parts of it that are utilities. There may be parts of it that are not. There's the idea that you are paying as you go. Instead of buying software, you're really renting space on somebody's software. People think of the cloud as being located at some other facility in another state. That may or may not be true. The cloud could actually be within your own facility. If you have multiple locations, you may be running what's called a private or community cloud, and those clouds are actually being accessed by your remote locations. A lot of people are doing that now. And then how is it consumed? Our usual thought is through a web browser, but other technologies like terminal servers or Citrix are actually cloud technologies. So all of these things in general is questions you're thinking about. How do you pay? Where is it located? And how does it get consumed on what devices? So back to that sort of analogy, an analogy to explain cloud computing is that of public utilities such as electricity, gas, and water. Centralized utilities freed individuals from the difficulties of generating electricity or pumping water, as well as all of the development and maintenance tasks involved. This translates to a reduced cost in software distribution and installation, but total savings in terms of dollars is yet to be seen. Generally, the cloud technology, and I'm going to put up a chart in a minute that talks about this, people think that you're going to get an economy of scale and knowledge that's cheaper and better, that it'll be a lower barrier to entry, software, hardware, and development, and that you'll have reduced costs. Some of these may be true, depending on how you do it, but there is some trade-offs for that. Some of this is a little question, and it hasn't really been around long enough to make a definitive answer that this will cost you less over time. Sometimes when you really look at a capital expenditure versus the operation expense over a period of 5 years, a cloud solution can cost more. So you really need to think in terms of what your needs are and your reasoning. If you, for instance, have a lot of people that work out of their homes and you don't have as many people in the central office, or you have a lot of remote locations, cloud may make a lot of sense. You don't have to maintain the infrastructure. Maybe your IT costs are high and you don't really have the in-house expertise and you're outsourcing it to someone else, and you'd like to have a centralized relationship with your software vendor and your hardware vendor so there's one number to call. So those are all reasons, but each one can have benefits and pros and cons. In 2010, the Aberdeen Group ran a what are you interested in getting out of the cloud? And cost considerations did definitely provide the most appeal. So if we look down this, you'll see that the lower total cost of ownership was the highest percentage across all 3 years for what people were looking for out of a cloud solution. Reducing the cost and effort of upgrades, lowering your upfront costs. We have limited IT resources and no interest in building IT staff. We're seeking a best fit solution. We'll consider any delivery model and not emotionally attached to having it in the house. Some people are very adamant about they want what's called an on-premise solution. They don't want someone else with access to their data. And then a strategy choice to focus internal resources elsewhere. So if you look along that continuum, you'll probably see yourself. Things that you want to do, things that you're looking for to get out of cloud technologies. The translation on that is, people are looking for a lower TCO, a lower total cost of ownership, a lower barrier to entry, and lower cost of maintaining applications, IT skills, and staff to gain some economies of scale. And those are all valid. Like I said, it can vary because you have, there are cultural barriers and process barriers to implementing cloud technology. Process barriers is just replacing your equipment, transferring your data, building the infrastructure you need to run that. The cultural barriers are, do I want my accounting data hosted someplace else? This is one of the reasons that if you look across cloud adoption, you'll notice that ERPs, or Enterprise Resource Planning Systems, which is what MAS and DM2 are very, very slow to move into that space. People are not comfortable with, in general, businesses are not comfortable with outsourcing their main accounting lifeblood, main order processing system to someplace else. But it is beginning to change, and that's why we're exploring and developing opportunities and technologies around this. It is definitely a growing interest, and so we really want to embrace it, but we just want everybody to know exactly sort of how it comes together. So I mentioned that there are different types of clouds. I want to talk about those to help paint a picture and help you understand what our thinking is. Specifically, there are three types. There's software as a service, or SaaS. You've probably heard that term before. Infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, and platform as a service, PS. They're just industry buzzwords, but specifically, each one addresses a different layer or a different thought process about what's being done. So if we take first software as a service, it's really designed to deliver software as a service over the internet, eliminate the need to install and run the application on the customer's own computers, and simplify maintenance and support. That particular technology is what most people think of. If you step back and you think about your interactions with other websites, for instance, going to a major oil site, downloading or uploading information, going to the Google examples, Google Apps, Gmail, RSS readers, all kinds of things that you might interact with, those tend to fall into the SaaS model. So that's the kind of mental image people paint when they think of the cloud. But what I want to point out is people tend to use the terms SaaS and cloud interchangeably, but they're really two different things. Access and processing of data remotely can be accomplished a lot of different ways, not necessarily through a SaaS solution, and we're going to talk about the pros and cons of each one of these. So the next one is really designed to, the infrastructure is to deliver computer infrastructure, typically a platform virtualization environment, as a server rather than purchasing server, software, data center space, or network equipment. Clients instead buy those resources as a fully outsourced service. Now, what this is really describing is one layer down from SaaS. So SaaS is like you're buying space on somebody else's application that is being hosted, and that application is uniform. There's no customization, some more limited configurations, but you're basically all using the same kind of thing. In this model, you're actually moving one layer down, and you're actually putting your infrastructure on the cloud. So you might own or lease or pay a monthly fee for space on someone else's server or your own server. So there's something called a co-location. These are internet junction points where things connect together, and you may actually have a piece of hardware located at that location, or some virtualized space on someone else's server that they're maintaining for you. They're making sure it's got its uptime. They have the redundancies. They have the multiple pipes, the high-speed connections, and all those things. And they're handling all the IT side of making sure your system's running properly. So it's one level deeper than that. But the system, they're just really dealing with that hardware piece. And the application is yours. So your application is running on that piece of hardware in its own closed environment, and it's not exposed to anybody else's systems. It's not a shared database. It is running on that virtualized hardware. Finally, and this is just here for completeness, but this final one is a platform is to deliver a computing platform and solution stack as a service, often consuming cloud infrastructure and sustaining cloud applications. It facilitates deployment of applications without the cost and complexity of buying and managing the underlying hardware and software layers. So this is basically the idea is that this is the platform you would build a cloud solution on. So you wouldn't necessarily buy something that was a platform, but it may be used in deploying your solution as part of that, a part of the other structures. So in translation, the services model is we host our stuff, So these are the publisher's applications. This is DM2 or Mass's applications. We host other people's stuff, which is the infrastructure model, which would be third-party applications. So we have the hardware connections and all that, and then we're hosting a third-party application like Mass, or the platform where we host your stuff, which is customer-developed applications. So DM2's developed applications would be hosted on that. So that's generally the different types of clouds. As I mentioned before, they sort of work together as really one system. So you have the virtual machines, servers on the back end, running the platform, running the application, and then you're connecting via a web browser, a mobile app, a thin client, or terminal emulator into those connections. So generally, that's how it rolls out. And we're going to talk about the pros and cons of some specific parts of this to help you begin to understand the difference. Because when I talk about what we're looking at, it'll help you understand why we might make the choices we make. But next, I want to talk about what are the different kinds of cloud deployments. So there are really 3 different kinds of ways, once you've built your cloud technology or you've got your cloud up, how you're going to actually make it available. So the 3 are the public cloud, which is generally what you think of when you think of cloud. You think of Google, you think of Microsoft. The community cloud, and I'll explain that in a little more detail, and a private cloud. Some of you are running private clouds right now. Interestingly enough, Mass 200 sort of natively runs a private cloud. Mass 200's, now there's 2 versions of Mass. There's Mass 90 and Mass 200. But Mass 200 specifically uses a thin client called a launcher. That's the little thing you see with the buttons and the drop-down menus. But it doesn't do any processing locally on your computer. The processing all happens at the servers. So it's sending very thin instructions back and forth to the server for things to actually happen there. So in a way, it's a private cloud. You could use a Citrix technology or terminal server technology, and people do that, to host that environment, in which case it truly is a cloud connection where you can have the internet as the back end. One of the problems with the internet is that it does have what's called latency, which is, you guys all know, you get home at 7 or 8 o'clock at night and you want to get on the internet to go look at the sports scores, and it takes forever to load. That's because you have a bunch of people on there all at the same time wanting to look at sports scores or watch Netflix or whatever it is. And then at night, and then in the morning, you get up and, at 5 a.m. and you log on, and all of a sudden it's super fast. That's because nobody's on. Everybody's still asleep. That's basically what latency is. And one of the problems with the internet is that you can have different performance. So sometimes it's really fast, sometimes it's not so fast. And that can create problems when you're using thin client applications. So there's solutions to all of that, but it's just understanding the challenges. So specifically talking about the public cloud applications, storage, and other resources are made available to the general public by a service provider. That's like your utility. These services are free or offered on a pay-per-use model. Generally, public cloud service providers like Microsoft and Google own and operate the infrastructure and offer access only via internet. So this is Flickr, Facebook, this is Google, this is Microsoft. These are the cloud, well, it's not all of Microsoft, but outside their enterprise, it's the general consumer level type of connections and things. There's gazillions of these. You guys can all think of examples, and I'm sure they're things used every day, but they all run in the public cloud. Now, this might be new to some of you, is this idea of a community cloud. So a community cloud shares infrastructure between several organizations from a specific community with common concerns. For instance, security, compliance, and jurisdiction. Now, in the petroleum industry, you guys know that security, compliance, jurisdiction all are important things. You have to make sure your security is good, of course. You have compliance issues. If you're taking, for instance, credit cards, you have to have certifications for all that. In jurisdiction for your taxes and everything. All these things are common threads that you guys have, and whether it's managed internally or by a third party, hosted internally or externally, they at least have a common concern, a common thing that they want to try and achieve. The costs are spread over fewer users than a public cloud, but more than a private cloud. So only some of the cost savings potential of cloud computing are realized. So this is but it gives you more security than the public cloud. So in more uniformity to a specific industry, than you would see in a public cloud. The third is a private cloud. Private cloud is cloud infrastructure operated solely for a single organization, whether managed internally or by a third party, and hosted internally or externally. So whether the servers are located at your Oklahoma facility and you're accessing it from California, Florida, and Georgia, or that is located at Amazon's S3 hosting services, it's still a private cloud. You don't expose it to the internet. It's your applications running on your space. So you can think of it as the infrastructure model that you're running a private cloud. It gives you the most security. Other people don't have access to it. And it's somewhat the simplest to put up. It's the simplest thing to get started, and we have people that run this today. So now that I've kind of given you some definitions, I want to talk about the pros and cons to kind of prime you for what different solutions are available and why you might choose one over the other, and what you should be considering as you move forward with whatever your cloud computing initiatives may be. So when you look at software, there are three real types of software deployment solutions that you can consider. Basically, you have the on-premise solution, which most of you are very familiar with because you're running on-premise now. You have your own stuff installed, you have some sort of connectivity to those servers, and that's how you're running. It's all located at your office. The infrastructure as a service, that's the one I was talking about where someone else is potentially hosting your hardware or virtualizing your hardware. They're handling the IT management and all the legwork there, and you're accessing it just like the computers were in your location, but in reality they're someplace else. And then the pure software as a service provider, which we've talked about. So the pros of an on-premise solution is it's highly customizable and configurable. So it allows you to modify the software. If you think about it, everybody has needs and things to optimize the software for their business. Every customer we have at DM2 has some sort of customized solution to match how they work. If you think about it a little bit more, a little bit deeper, for all intents and purposes, petroleum and for that matter, accounting software is relatively a commodity. So where you differentiate yourselves as customers is different pricing structures, different features, but also in how you customize the software for your needs. So maybe you have an angle on your fuel buying that requires some special stuff, and we've done that for you. That might be different than someone else. So it's highly customizable and configurable. That all is your ownership. You have that software on your computer, and you don't have to care about whether someone else wants exactly the same thing you do because it's your system. Another thing is this is your ERP system. So one of the real pros is you have complete control over modifications and upgrades, what and when. So what are you going to change and when is it going to happen? It's one thing when you have an application that gets changed that affects one person. It's a whole different thing when you can change an application and it affects 50 or 100 people. So you have, with on-premise, you have complete control over those modifications. You also, as you know, DM2, for instance, is it's really in our DNA to look for partnerships. When you own your own solution on-premise, you can interface basically with anybody you want. So you have best-of-breed partners and an ISV community and knowledge for industry-specific needs. So this, you don't have to be as uniform in this solution, and you can pick out your own truck automation or pick out your own tax reporting software, however you want to do it, without necessarily having to get a bunch of other people to agree that that's how it should be done. And it does have relatively low switching costs. So if you decide to move to a different thing, you own your data. The data's there. It lives on your systems, lives on your computers. You have all the stuff there. So it has relatively low switching costs. The cons, though, you do have large upfront costs for hardware and software. You can have relatively high ongoing costs for IT, and you really don't have one neck to choke for support and integration. When you have all these different vendors, the guy who supplies your hardware, your wiring, the person who runs your network, the software providers, maybe you have 6 different software providers, you've got your email host, all those things end up being different threads that you have to keep track of. And so when something breaks, you can get into finger pointing where somebody's saying, well, it's this other person's fault and it's this person's fault. And so you kind of lose that one contact, that one responsible party when you do have an on-premise solution. So the next thing I want to talk about is that whole infrastructure as a service solution. In its pros, well, because I said it's actually a hosted version of the data residing on a virtual computer. It has all of the pros of the on-premise. So basically, everything we talked about with custom configurations, all of the complete control over modifications and upgrades, the best-of-breed partners, low switching costs, all those things are really pros of that particular solution. Because you're getting a level deeper than having to have the same software across everybody. You're able to have basically a scalable hardware platform that each person's software runs on top of, hosted at a data center. That reduces your hardware software maintenance costs, because that's usually a virtualized computer, so it's one computer that's running many things. It's kind of hard to think about it, but it's like one giant computer that runs a bunch of little computers, and each one's isolated from each other. So you only have to maintain that one computer, not a whole bunch of other ones. You usually end up with a single support contact. So for instance, if your software supplier and your hosting suppliers are the same people, then it's usually just one number to call no matter what the particular problem is. And it has kind of medium switching costs. So if you're going to move from one platform to another, you own the data, you have the systems, you own the software, or you're in a relationship where you're leasing the software, but you own the data, and then you could transfer that to another system. So it's not as much lock-in. It's not quite as open as on-premise, but there's not as much lock-in as a service solution. The cons, you do have a little bit of decrease in control for changes and modifications. That can be mitigated in a number of ways, but that is a cost. There may be things that just, like the next point says, maybe some limitations. So there may be things that you just can't do because the third-party integration can't work that way. But that's really few and far between. And it does still require some upfront service costs. So there is some upfront things you'll have to do on your end to get that ready to go. The software as a service model, pros, you have the lowest upfront costs per user, and it has a rapid time to implement. So that's conceptually for the services model, software as a service. Those are real pros. However, it does have limited customization and configuration. Since everybody's running the same software, you are limited about what you can do inside the software. So you may ask for customization kind of change, and it can't be done because it would affect the other system for other users, because you are using a shared system. There's no control of modifications or upgrade potentially, meaning that when the system gets updated, you might come in the next day and your data entry screens are different than they were before. I use several cloud solutions myself, and I see that kind of stuff all the time where you get an update and no one's even told you this was coming, and all of a sudden the way something works is not quite the same. And in an ERP system, that's just frightening. That can ripple down through your organization. It could affect your ability to get your invoices out, all those kinds of things. So it can be a real risk there. It's difficult. It can be difficult or impossible to integrate with off-premise best-of-breed applications because you begin to look at, how do you integrate someone else, and now I've got to add new integration for them, but I have to change the software. You may have a partner or something that you grew, maybe you developed your own truck system and you really love it, but now we're going to try and interface it to the back end, and so you have to create all this other infrastructure for it, and no one wants to share in the cost of that, so it ends up being a big deal. And it can have very high switching costs. You can end up, in some situations, not being able to get your data out. There's questions about that, but if that service doesn't provide a way to export all your information, it may make migration to something else difficult. So with that in mind, I want to talk about, I wanted to point these items out, and it's not meant to scare you away from cloud or anything like that. I'm a big proponent and think it's really the future of computing. But these are things that keep me personally up at night about SaaS solutions. So when I'm either working as a developer and as a technology leader for DM2, these are the things I think about. When I'm a consumer of software as a service solutions on the internet, things like Google Gmail or consumers of Facebook or whatever, I think about those things, and these are the things that keep me up at night. And I wanted to share them with you. Like I said, they're not meant to scare you, but they're things you should think about in your conversations. First, if you're in a model where you're paying a monthly fee and you don't really own the software, you could miss a payment and your ERP gets turned off. So you come in the next morning just like your electricity would be turned off and your ERP is gone. Your data lives with other data, and I said sounds illegitimate or immoral, but what it is that potentially your data may be stored in a single instance of a database. So it's possible that your data could become intermingled or compromised on the actual server itself, or could be lost because of something else that happens. Gmail, I keep picking on Google just because everybody knows it, but Gmail lost a bunch of mail one day. So things like that you got to think about, and they're not going to restore the system because everybody's sharing that data and sharing that pipe, so they can't just sort of restore everything. It has to be dealt with very carefully. Very limited reporting capabilities, but who needs reports from your ERP, right? You guys don't use reports. It can have very limited customization capabilities, and I put in there because everyone knows that ERP out of the box works for everyone, right? No, we have an entire department at DM2 dedicated to customizing the software for the end users. Even though Sage Software and DM2, we've been doing this for 20 years, and Sage even longer than that, we don't get everything just the way you want it, so we want to be able to customize, and this would assume that everybody's the same. You still can't get rid of that pesky IT guy. You still are going to have some internal infrastructure maintenance of your PCs, things like that has to go on. There are hidden costs that you can be blind to. Things like you may increase your data consumption over your network that's going out, so you may have to have a larger pipe to the internet than what you used to have, so there's a monthly cost for your T1 or for however it is you're connected that can have some impact. What if you want to use another application specific for your industry and interface to it? Well, once again, you'd have to convince the software as a service provider to do that interface. What if the internet goes down and you can take the rest of the day off? It's that, doing an infrastructure solution or a service solution, any one of those can have this risk. So, one of the nice things about these solutions is most of them do live at data centers that have multiple connections and all that, but if it goes down at your end, it's something to be thinking about. What if the cloud internet goes down like Amazon did recently, Amazon's S3 cloud? Then you can take the rest of the day off. It's kind of like number 3. What happens if you can't access your data? What happens if that server's offline, not even through anything that you did? So it's something to just be thinking about in your head as you consider these solutions. And then number 1 utilizes the cockroach hotel model. You check in, but you can't check out. You have many years of critical corporate data in an ERP system. It's going into a rental cloud potentially, which lives with other data, and you may not be able to get it all out. So those are just things to think about as you look at different solutions and different implementations for hosted solutions to make sure these are questions to ask. What happens if this happens? What are your plans for this? How do you deal with it? So anyway, just wanted to point that out. There are things that are on my mind, and just wanted to share them. So knowing all that, what are DM2 and Sage Software's cloud computing strategies? What's on our minds relative to cloud? First of all, just some statements. DM2 recognizes the need for different options to be available at each tier. Some customers want a total closed on-premise solution. They, as I talked about before, the ERP migration to the cloud is slow. People don't want to hand over that level of control right away. Some people are further along that continuum than others. But we need to be able to provide a closed on-premise solution. You can buy the software, you put it on your systems, you're in charge of your IT resources, and it does what you want. Some customers want a self-hosted private cloud for their remote locations. So they want to host it themselves, but they want it set up in a cloud environment that their other remote locations can connect to, and we have customers doing that now. And then finally, some customers would like a DM2 hosted solution. So, and that may include everything from you buy the software and install on our servers, and you're paying us to maintain that hardware and an infrastructure and a connectivity for you, or you may actually go all the way, we may go all the way to a type of leasing model where you're paying a monthly fee like a utility for access to that where DM2 is hosted. We're getting a lot of inquiries about it. So the first 2 solutions we have available and we can implement. The third is something that's new to us, and that's what we're working through. Now, we know something about you guys too. DM2 customers are highly customized and optimized for their businesses. As I said earlier, every single customer we have has some sort of custom programming, or at least most of them have some sort of custom programming to optimize the software for their business. So whatever cloud solutions or whatever solutions we have will need to be able to support that kind of configuration. Due to the scale of an ERP system, customers need to control their upgrade cycle for training. So we need a solution that each customer can control based on our now of course we retire our software, as versions come out, but you still need to be, we don't just flip a switch and tomorrow you're on a new version. I know it sounds great on the surface, but implementing that can be a nightmare. Like I said, you've got training issues and behavior issues of things, the way the software works. So we want you to be able to have control over that. So you can roll it out and train and do those things. If you think about it, for almost all of our customers, upgrading your system from one version to another version usually involves months of work. So, 3 months and up of getting ready, training, making sure everything's working properly and going live. So you don't want to just go because somebody decided to put out a new feature. And then one of the things we know is that DM2 customers want integration with best-of-breed applications. So if you have a warehouse control system, a truck automation system, you've got tank monitors, you've got whatever, you want to be able to integrate into that. DM2 has always kept an open integration policy here. So we'll talk to anybody about integrating to anything, and we'd hate to not be able to offer that. So it's important that whatever strategy we do continues to support those things, because we believe they're important to us and they're important to you. So after considering all that, we have found that the infrastructure as a service is the best solution today that meets the needs of our customers. In other words, when you look at all those different layers and different architectures, that is what we find meets those requirements and allows us to offer a good solution. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at offering in the future a hosted platform where you will have your software hosted with your customizations. You'll have your remote access and all those kind of things. It all lives on DM2 servers, and that's the model we're looking at. We are currently working with Sage and other partners to make that solution available. Sage is also headed down this path of creating a hosted version of Mass 90, hosted at a data center, but that's conceptually why we're looking at that, is this idea of customization, configuration, control of upgrades, all those kinds of things, which in an ERP system, you want to take kind of baby steps as you move that off-premise. Now, all that being said, what should you be doing today to think about this, or what kind of steps could you take to leverage some of this? Well, first of all, you could, of course, deploy your own private cloud for your users. You could put up we have customers that do this. You could put up a server at your facility or one of your offices that is running in a virtual VMware space. You could put a Citrix front end on that, and you would have a cloud solution for your other offices. So that is something you could do today. Like I said, we have customers doing it. The Sage CRM product, it can be deployed as a private cloud solution. Sage CRM is a web-based product that uses a SQL backend. Would be hosted on your equipment, and then you can access it through a web browser. So it can actually itself be deployed that way. A lot of you are already using Citrix or Terminal Server Solution, which is a type of private cloud, so you may already have a solution in place. And then some customers are using that type of solution to access Mass and DM2 from portable devices like tablets and iPads. We get a lot of questions about, well, I really want to access Mass from my iPad. Can I do that? And the reality is yes. Both Citrix and Terminal Server clients are available for the iPad, for the iPhone, and I assume for the Android market, where you can remote access into your systems, like if you're using a virtualized server running Citrix or Terminal Server, you can access that equipment. We have people doing that now. So those are, getting a software as a service is not a limitation to you being able to use those devices in your computing environment. But all that being said, the most important thing you can do is get together with your team and discuss what your requirements are. Think about all the things that we talked about, and think about what limitations and things you would be willing to live with, or what kinds of things are really the highest priorities to you. What kind of solution makes sense for your business? what kind of benefits and trade-offs work for your organization. All those are questions that you can talk internally. And of course, we have a DM2 Advanced Business Solutions group. You can engage them in a discussion. We especially, we have a lot of experience with very high-end customers who are doing this sort of thing now and have got a lot of learning under our belts for this. So if you're a medium-sized guy or even a large or small-sized guy and you're thinking about this, you could talk to our ABS group and they can help you define it and think about a strategy for a go-forward solution for your needs. So in recap, really what I want is some big takeaways for you. Cloud computing is not a specific thing, but a continuum of solutions. So be thinking in the framework that I presented here, what does cloud computing mean to your business? What are you trying to accomplish? Is it reducing your total cost of ownership IT resources? Are you willing to outsource the ownership of your data? Are you, all those kinds of things. It's a continuum of solutions from private to public, all the different options. Cloud computing does not necessarily mean a shift from a capital expenditure model to an operational expense model. Remember that. Paying a monthly utility bill instead of buying software is not necessarily how it works. You could very easily buy your software, buy your host, and then turn that over to an infrastructure service provider, and you own the computer, and they're maintaining it for you, but you own the computer, you own the software, and you're just paying monthly hosting fees. So that's, there's many things along that continuum to consider. And cloud computing can have great benefits, but it does have limitations. It does have things that it doesn't do real well, and just remember, when you're identifying your needs, you want to think about the specific third-party applications you use and think about how you use the system to decide what option may be best for you. So that wraps up the presentation. I hope you found this educational. That was my plan, was to help you, as I said earlier, the title of this was Cloud Computing, What Does It Mean for You? But I really wanted to say, what does it mean to you, in helping you define and understand cloud computing and its effect on your organization. I do want to let you know, and I appreciate you attending. I really like doing these kind of things, sharing this information, and I'm very excited about this move forward and what we're going to be doing in this space. And as a technology person myself, it's interesting to watch and to grow along with you guys and keep you on the leading edge and not the bleeding edge. So next time on June 14th is our next webinar, and it's going to be hosted by Rob Pierce, who is our Professional Services Vice President, and he's going to be talking about business intelligence, or using business intelligence. The BUZZ acronym there is BI. Using BI to gain competitive advantage and improve profitability. So this is moving beyond just your transaction processing and really getting into analyzing your stuff. We call it not only working in the business, but also working on the business. So this is looking at real metrics to work on your business. So Anthony, we can move into questions and answers.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. That was very informative for us. And again, just to recap again, those listening on the webinar, if you haven't asked a question and you have one, now's a good time to go ahead and put it in the question box. Again, reminder, like Chris mentioned, our next webinar is going to be June 14th, 11:30 a.m. Pacific time, Business Intelligence Basics. And you'll learn how to use this business intelligence to gain a competitive advantage and improve profitability. June 14th. Now, let's go to the questions we received. And, well, Chris, either no one heard you or you did a very thorough job explaining everything.
Well, what's happened in the previous webinars I've been involved in, we'll get some questions after the fact as people process it, think about it, discuss it, and then they'll let us know if they have any questions. So.
Yeah, it looks like everybody might have been very informed because nobody's dropped off on the webinar and they're still listening. So again, I just wanted to remind everyone that if you do have questions, you can email us. And I want to let everybody know that, again, today's webinar has been recorded, and once the recording is available, we're going to post it along with a copy of today's presentation on the customer content page of our website, and we'll send you an email to let you know when it's available to download. So again, if you think of any questions after the webinar today, or if you'd like to find out more about today's topic, just feel free to email us at sales@dm2.com. Again, sales@dm2.com. And no, I think that's it. Thanks again to Chris Lemonier for his very informative presentation, and thank you all for attending today's webinar on cloud computing. What does it mean to you? And this will conclude our presentation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.